Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Episode 30 something. I don't remember what number it is, but I will find out when I'm uploading the video. And I actually suspect the last podcast I uploaded might have got the number wrong again. I'm going through that phase again where I don't remember what number we're up to, but doesn't really fucking matter, does it? Oops, I said a swear. I swearsed in the beginning of the video. Doesn't matter. Ooh, sorry. Hi, how are you? I was kind of thinking a lot about what I was going to talk about today, and for a while I thought I was going to talk about perhaps Ariana Grande and how there's all this drama around like the Wicked set, you know, Wicked, that theatrical thing that's going on. I don't really know Wicked, and I'm not an Arianator. I'm not a Selena-tor either, but there was some topics about that I was kind of wanting to talk about, and I wanted to hear people's like perspective on it. But then something else came across my For You page, my dashboard. So I've got something today that's really important to talk about, something that I need people to listen to me on. Does that make sense? I need people to open their ears, put on your thinking caps, and listen to what I have to say today, because unlike most of my episodes are kind of silly, I guess. I don't know, are they? But today's episode, serious. Like I'm wearing my Terminator shirt today. Serious. Ooh. 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 Yep. Very serious today. Okay, jokes aside, it is serious today. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what I'm talking about right this second, but I want to show you something that I think could be very, very powerful. So let me just pause my music for a second. Let me just go 2 minutes in, go intro, and then what's the time now? 2 minutes. I'm gonna put my OBS down here for a second, and we're gonna switch over, and I'm gonna show you this video that I think is very cool, very interesting. Let's have a watch. Let's have a watcherino of this video. Make sure it's not too loud. Oh yeah! Now, if that ain't the definition of thigh slapping goodness, this is what they call a thunderclap. All respect, though. All respect. There's a reason I'm showing this. Now that's it. So that is what they call the Maori All Blacks perform their haka against Ireland. The team is called the All Blacks, okay? Okay, don't clip me on that, okay? But yeah, the Maori people, Maori from Aotearoa, New Zealand. Very cool. And I have another video that I would like to show you in a minute, but hold on. We're going to go on to something else right now, and this is explaining what the haka is. So I've been to New Zealand. I went this year actually. It was very awesome, very cool. I loved it. just an all-round very awesome experience. And I think strikingly for me, one of the biggest things was the culture and how the Maori culture has really what's the word? I guess what I'm trying to say is how Maori culture has been able to become like I don't know, more pervasive in culture. I mean like more prevalent, yeah. So when I went to New Zealand, or before I went there, I was expecting it to be a lot like Australia. And if you don't know, in Australia we have an indigenous population called the Aboriginals or Aborigines, also called Indigenous Australians. And let's just say like the presence of the Aborigines or the Indigenous, I can't remember which one is like the PC term, so I'm sorry about that, but the Indigenous, I'll just say Indigenous Australians, they are not very prevalent in Australia. I think there's like so much history there's so much terrible stuff that happened because of British colonialism and settlers and shit. So I think there's a very stark contrast between New Zealand's treatment of their indigenous people. The Maori people still get kind of like shit on, but the way that the culture has been preserved is very different to Australia. I believe a year ago, Australia had a referendum, which is like the country votes on whether something should be enacted or not. And I think even in like 2017 or something, we had a referendum on gay marriage, and it was like, should gay marriage become like a thing? And it was voted yes, I think. So yay, gay marriage. We got gay marriage. But this referendum about the Aboriginal people was an attempt to create like a Aboriginal tribunal, or like a government, a part of the government body would have Aboriginals in it, and they would also be consulted when like decision making was occurring. And a lot of misinformation was put out during this time to absolutely not allow this to go through. And I was all for it personally. I know a lot of people had their reasons for voting no. However, anytime I would ask people about their reasonings for no, it was always deeply rooted in some sort of racist rhetoric. You probably didn't even like mean for it to be racist. It just kind of, when you grow up a certain way, sometimes you don't realize what you're doing and what's being said. And so a lot of people were super racist about it. The no vote ended up winning, so we didn't end up getting the Aboriginal body. And this isn't about the Aboriginals, this is about the New Zealand Maori people, right? But I'm just saying, from the perspective of an Australian, we have like no Aboriginal ties anymore. We basically obliterated the Aboriginal population thanks to chicken pox and stuff. And then also the White Australia policy that happened way back when. And then also the intent to breed out the Aboriginals. Very, very weird, very sick things that our government decided to do. So there's a lot of controversy around all of it and stuff. And so for me, when I went to New Zealand, I thought that it would be quite similar, because in my mind for a very long time, New Zealand was kind of just Australia, but maybe a little bit smaller or something. I don't know why, but for the longest time I thought New Zealand was like just Australia. But after learning that it's actually not Australia. New Zealand is its own little thingy. There was a time where New Zealand was a part of the New South Wales colony, interestingly, but that was for a very short period. And then the Crown, the British government or the British royalty, decided that New Zealand should be its own colony. It should be its own thing. So New Zealand is very much its own country. It's not a part of Australia in that way, but we do have like sister treaties or something, or we're sisters. Yeah, so anyway, I get to New Zealand, and the thing that is so striking about the way that they've preserved Maori culture, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure that there's a lot that's still lost to history and stuff, but there's like all these signs everywhere. There's a lot of like the Maori language that's embedded in how they say things. Like you go to New Zealand and everyone says kia ora, which is like welcome, I think, if I remember right. I only spent 2 weeks there, so some things I might get wrong, some pronunciations I'll definitely get wrong, so I'm sorry about that, but I'm trying my best. Anyway, so let's move on to this, right? The haka. The haka is a very important part of Maori culture. And I'll read over here what exactly is the haka. Well, the haka is, or was, a customary way to welcome visiting tribes, but it also served to invigorate warriors as they headed into battle. It was a show of physical prowess, but also an embodiment of cultural pride, strength, and unity. Although haka is the Maori word for dance, it is not a dance in the sense you might imagine. When I look at it, I definitely do think of it as a dance. It's pretty cool. I think it does resemble a dance in the way that I would imagine, but anyway, it's usually performed in a group. It involves chanting and actions such as stamping, hand movements, and facial gestures. Haka varies by tribal region, with many haka telling the story of significant events in an iwi tribe history. So there's like an example of the Maori language just being used very naturally in the way that people write about New Zealand and stuff. And that there is an example of something that we do not get here in Australia, because in Australia a lot of the elders have passed on. And also another thing about Australia that's different to New Zealand is because Australia is so vast and big, we have had so many different little tribes, like Aboriginal tribes, everywhere. And they all have their own language, their own traditions. And even the tribes would have trouble communicating with one another because they all were just so... Is secular or isolated the right word? They're always so isolated from one another, I think, that, yeah, it was difficult for even them to communicate with one another. Whereas I believe with the Maori people, there was, of course, a few different tribes, but I think they actually all kind of had a similar language. But I'm not a historian. I don't know I don't know that history well enough to talk about it, but that's my understanding from what I learned from the Maori cultural experience in Rotorua, I think. Today, the haka is used as a sign of respect and is performed on important occasions such as sporting events, weddings, funerals, and powiri, a traditional welcome. But I think that haka can still be used in the traditional sense, especially when it talks about embodying cultural pride, strength, and unity. I think that's a very important thing to highlight here today. So that's the haka, everybody. I hope you learned something. Yeah, Weirdo, the challenge, Rotorua. I don't know if this was the place I went to. No, this looks very like different, but they have a lot of cultural showings of the haka, or just like Maori culture in general. It's very cool. It's very interesting stuff. I would highly recommend people look into it if you're interested. It's very neat. And again, it's like one of the few cultures, in my opinion, that have really managed to keep this thing alive, this culture alive, and cultivate it. And there's like this thing that we also learned when we were in Rotorua about how the Maori culture was actually dying at one point, like a decade ago. I don't remember the exact numbers, but the Maori culture was actually really dying. And thanks to certain things being put in place, when you watch TV in New Zealand, there's a channel specifically for learning the Maori language. There's channels that are in just the Maori language. I think there's even like news channels and stuff too where they just speak Maori. I hope that's the name of the language. Oh my god. Sorry, I'm like second guessing so much of myself because I want to approach this as like respectfully as I can, you know, respectfully as someone like me can, right? And this is something I care about a lot because, you know, it just makes me so sad when I see people not understanding a different culture, a culture that is very different from other people. And I've been seeing a lot of talk about, so a lot of disrespect around Maori people lately, and it is actually making me very angry with a lot of people. But okay, so that's kind of my explanation of some like the Maori culture, and I want to give it down and show you guys another video which I think is very powerful, very cool. It's a bit solemn, but this is called in memory of Jerem Hadley Nathaniel Rihari, Haka Tau Ka Tau. This is a haka at a funeral. So as you can see, the women also get involved in this, and I think a part of there is a gender difference between like the female and the male haka, I think, or at least like with women they have this thing called their pukana, where they're supposed to create like the face of an owl with their facial expressions. I don't remember what the one for the guys is. I think the guys also have a pukana, but I'm not 100% sure on that one. I just know about the women's one. It's very interesting stuff, and as you can see, okay, this is a bit of a weird thing to be stopped on, so I'm gonna move over here. There we go. It's very, as you can see, it's a very significant cultural tradition, and I think that if you're not like aware of it, it can feel maybe uncomfortable to look at. It can maybe seem like strange, but I think that when you get to know a lot more about the significance of it and the history behind it, it becomes like a very empowering and very strong thing to see, and the unity that it brings out in people is really heartwarming, and I think it's a really special thing that they have that they can engage in. So I kind of love it, and even seeing the football ones. There's a few other football hakas out there that you can watch where they're all like holding hands, or they're gathered around with each other, and it's like that's what it's like to be. I don't know. I think that on like a different topic, I think could be really nice for men. You know, could be really nice for men and women to feel like they're connected with one another. Girls, I say this all the time. Girls, we have sleepovers. Men, Maori men, they have the haka. Anyway. Now I'm going to show you another video, which is an extremely important showing of the usage of the haka.
E ono ngā pōti e whakahe. Kawana! Hapaka manufiriti a koeu! Kamate, kamate,
The House is suspended until...
Do you want to know how many people are meet riding this guy? I think you can probably guess how many people are all for the... There's a lot of people out there who believe that this guy represents me. This is me, yo.
The ringing of the bells, the gallery is to be cleared.
So there's been a lot of controversy around this lately, and this is actually what I've been getting to because this is what sparked my video today. So what's happening here exactly is that there is a party vote in progress, and as you can see, oh, that's pretty cool. They have the Maori translation over on the side there. That's pretty nice. That's pretty sweet. Yeah, so we got this party vote in progress, and you want to know what they're voting for is the All Party or some shit. Basically, the New Zealand Conservative Party is looking at the treaty that happened when the British colonizers came to New Zealand, and they're looking at the treaty and they're going, okay, Maori people just have like way too many like privileges, and we're not all about privileged people being above the law. No, we're about people being equal no matter what. And so they're basically doing an all lives matter to Maori culture. They're saying that Maori people are like overprivileged, they have too many rights, and we just frankly don't want that, okay? And so this has become a very troubling precedent for the people in New Zealand, and I think it's particularly troubling for Maori people for many reasons. And the reason why this made me so upset is that there's a lot of context missing here that people don't understand. And so the reason why the haka, I think, was performed here on this day in Parliament is there was actually a planned haka protest that was planned for I think the day after the bill was going to get released or signed or whatever. I don't remember the exact wording, but the bill was then unexpectedly pushed back or pushed forward. No, pushed forward. It was unexpectedly pushed forward by a week so that the haka protest was effectively the planned coordinated efforts of a protest was then being undermined because the governing body decided we're actually gonna move this along a lot quicker than we were going to for no particular reason, right? Yeah, you look at this fucking guy. Hold on, where is he? Where is he? Fuck. Hold on, he's over here. You look at this fucking guy and you're like, yeah, this man has my best interests at heart, surely. Okay, to be fair, I don't know this guy. I don't know if he's just like the person who's managing everything, but that's not the point. The point is, people think that the Maori people have way too many privileges, and I'm here to tell you today that that is not the case whatsoever, and that is a deeply racist opinion to have. And I will be going through why that is in just a moment. Okay? Another thing that I want to address is the people who are calling this childish. This is a very significant what is happening at the moment in New Zealand is very significant and is going to have a great impact on the Maori people, a great negative impact on Maori people, as if there already wasn't a lot of negatives that they have endured. And I'm going to go through some of that stuff in a moment. So I guess we could also talk about now, like, what is the whatchamacallit, the treaty. What is the treaty? Do you not know what the treaty is? To be honest, I didn't really know much about it myself until this morning when I actually started reading about it. And so we're going to go through a little history lesson, and don't worry, I'll put on some music so it's not like totally just me talking. Thank you. So it's called the Treaty of Waitangi, and the Treaty of Waitangi is the founding document of New Zealand. It's an agreement entered into by representatives of the Crown and of Maori iwi and Hapu, so tribes and sub-tribes. It is named after the place in the Bay of Islands where the treaty was first signed, and it was signed by over like 500 Maori chiefs. However, there was a bit of like a discrepancy with the treaty of like the one that was written by like the British Crown and by the one that was like translated into Maori language. As you can imagine, there's disagreements on the treaty for like many reasons, because to the Maori people, a lot of like the spoken meaning of things is important, or just as important as maybe what's written down. So while they were being explained things back in the day in the 1800s, they were probably being explained things that they took into consideration that maybe weren't written down in the same way. And so there's like a cultural language barrier, I think, there. So as with that, there's going to be disagreements. There's going to be like, hey, I thought you meant this, and it's like, no, we meant this, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's what comes into that's why there's like a Maori tribunal thing now, right? There's a Maori tribunal that will interpret the documents, the treaty and stuff, and they'll try to help out Maori people who make claims. Maori people are allowed to make claims on things such as, I don't know, like land. Maori have tried to have their grievances addressed. Yeah, so some kind of like claims about land transactions that took place that were unjust, that left grievance on the original owners and descendants. And I think it's like basically a way of like reparations for Maori people. We can go into like the tribunal thingy, or the Maori claimant people. I'm not good at words today, but we can go into that later. But first things first, we're going to talk about what the treaty is. So importantly, the treaty was not drafted as a constitution or a statute. It was a broad statement of principles upon which the British officials and Maori chiefs made a political compact or covenant to found a nation state and build a government in New Zealand to deal with pressing new circumstances. Like many treaties, it is an exchange of promises between the parties to it. It has 3 articles in it. So the Maori give the Crown an exclusive right to buy lands they wish to sell, and in return are guaranteed full rights of ownership of their lands, forests, fisheries, and other possessions. And Maori are given rights and privileges of British subjects, so they're just treated as if they're like also British people, right? So they get those privileges, which basically is like, okay, I'm sure the British subjects had a great time in the 1800s too. The treaty in Maori was deemed to convey the meaning of the English version, but there are important differences because there isn't going to be a one-to-one translation for every single thing. There's going to be differences. Most significantly, in the Maori version, the word sovereignty was translated as kawanatanga, governance, Some Maori believe that the governor would have had authority over the settlers alone. Others thought that they were given up the government of others thought that were given up the government over their lands but retaining the right to manage their own affairs. So it's all very complicated, I guess. The English version guaranteed undisturbed possession of all properties, but the Maori version guaranteed tino rangatiratanga full authority over taonga treasures which can be intangible. So there is things to be debated here, let's just say that. You can actually go look at the treaties yourself if you would like to. It's very cool piece of history. I say cool, but I mean it's like it's as in the idea that it's a preserved piece of, you know, history. So yeah, more than 40 chiefs signed the Maori copy of the treaty. And then okay, I don't know where I got 500 from. Oh right, there were about 50 signing meetings between February and September of 1840. About 540 chiefs gave their agreement. All but 39 chiefs signed a Maori language copy. Wow, okay. Okay, so there's that. And then we have, why was the treaty entered into? Why would the Maori people want to enter into a treaty with the British colonial settlers? New Zealand was changing quickly in the late 1830s. British subjects and other Europeans were acquiring land from Maori and had set up valuable commercial operations. Large groups of settlers had set up for New Zealand in 1839, and of course crime, violence, lawlessness was quite rife within the community, and the British resident, James Busby, could do little to control it. And foreign powers, notably the French, were also taking an interest in New Zealand. So this treaty was a way of Britain and, or the British Crown and New Zealand having their, I guess you could say alliance, or having it be like, this is British territory. French people, you cannot come here with your baguettes. No, no, no. Could you imagine if France took over New Zealand at that time? Can you imagine like what New Zealand might be like now? I feel like that's a very interesting thought to have, but not the one for right now, so we'll think about that in your own time, I guess. It could be interesting, but anyway. The British government appointed Captain William Hobson as consul and provided him instructions to negotiate for the sovereignty of New Zealand and for the setting up of a British colony, which is what happened. And that's what happened to Australia as well. Australia, famously, we had Mr. Cook, the Cook guy, he came. British settlers came to Australia. The Aboriginals did not like the look of those people because they seemed very weird. Or I think both people thought each other were very weird. The British called the Aboriginals like fucking savages just because they didn't have clothes, or they just wore very minimal clothing, and thought of them as like savage animals because of that, which is like, okay, that's weird. Okay, weird. And it's a very complicated like history with the Australian one as well, because I think there's like an argument behind like who shot first. Or I say shot, like it's like Star Wars. Did Han Solo shoot first, or did the other guy shoot first? And well, there's a lot of argument to be made around the Australian one, but I think the general consensus is that the British colonizers had done something to insult the Aboriginal people, and so the Aboriginal people, famously someone speared a British guy in the back or something, and then the British were like, we gotta do something about them Australians, boy. That's what the British sounded like back then, don't quote me on that. Yeah, so what happened after the treaty was signed in New Zealand? Shortly after the treaty was signed, shortly after the treaty was signed, Lieutenant Governor William Hobson proclaimed British sovereignty over the whole of New Zealand. His proclamations were ratified by the British government. So that means that him proclaiming like, yeah, we got sovereignty over New Zealand, the British government were like, yes, you do. That's my translation of those words for you. Under British law, New Zealand became technically a part of the colony of New South Wales. That's what I was talking about before. Further constitutional changes in late 1840 and early 1841 made New Zealand a crown colony in its own right. So if you thought that New Zealand was a part of Australia, technically you are correct at one point in time, but it is no longer the way it is. That was for like a hot minute, okay? So for a hot minute I was technically right. Back when I was like 12. Alright, is the treaty still valid today? This is a very, very important part of it all, because there is a lot of argument over the treaty, and I think at the moment they're trying to revise the treaty and what rights the Maori people have been given that they perhaps disagree with, I guess. So is it still valid today? The status of the treaty has evolved over time. Unlike many other countries, New Zealand does not have a constitution in the form of a single document. It is a collection of common laws, customs, and legislation that establish the framework of government. That's very complicated, but I can tell you about Australia. I don't understand the New Zealand one, but I can tell you about Australia. Australia, we have a constitution, but it's very tiny. It's a very tiny little booklet of like, I don't know, like 10 pages or something. 10 tiny little pages. Because the idea is that there shouldn't be a constitution that's like big and encompassing. There should be like levity and fluidity between like what can and cannot be put into the constitution, I think. I don't remember all too well, but ideas about the constitution also came up during the referendum for the Aboriginal governing body thing. And a lot of people would quote the constitution then, a lot of people who didn't understand it. Admittedly, I don't really understand the Australian Constitution. I don't think a single person has fucking read it, if I'm being honest. A lot of the people who were like quoting it and being like, well, according to the Constitution, there can't be an Aboriginal body. It's like, yeah, well, the Constitution is the way it is so that we can make changes. It's not like I feel like with the American Constitution, that's very like, this is the book of what we are going to be working with forever. I think that's the vibe. I don't know. So anyway, the treaty was the initial agreement that established British authority. This authority was later transferred to the New Zealand Parliament. Maori leaders and people have stressed the treaty's importance ever since. In recent history, successive governments have recognised the significance of the treaty in the life of the nation, and the current government is now recognising the treaty as a problem. It is being seen as something divisive, and I'll give you my opinion. I think it's not the treaty that's divisive, it's the lack of education and it's the misinformation about Maori people and privilege, and it's also the government that's divisive. The government is causing division. And I think we're seeing that a lot with a lot of countries. Governing bodies causing division. I think politics has become something that's so part of like your identity that when these things are challenged, it feels like we are being challenged in a way. So since the 1840, governments have taken actions that have resulted in the alienation of Maori land, waters, and other resources from their owners, generally without proper consent or compensation. I think the compensation is a big one here. The Maori have tried to have their grievances addressed, and some early governments attempted to settle their claims. Only some of the claims were addressed, and these attempts are now considered to have been inadequate. It's like, I feel like people would look at that and be like, oh, well then they can just look at all things and be like, oh, well, it's all inadequate. I think a lot of people are scared that Maori people are taking some kind of like advantage over their privileges and are abusing a system. But when we read more about it, you'll see just how much you have to go through making a claim as a Maori person. It's not an easy thing, okay? And it won't always result in a favorable decision, I guess. So recent governments have recognized that the way some land transactions took place was unjust. We talked about that. In 1975, the Waitangi Tribunal was established to consider claims by Maori against the Crown regarding breaches of principles of the treaty and to make recommendations to government to remove the prejudice and provide recompense. Since 1985, the tribunal has been able to consider Crown Acts and omissions dating back to 1840. So I think this is something, to break it down, this might be something that a lot of people don't like hearing about, because it's basically going like, there's a group of people who think, well, this happened back in this day, and you know, this is just how things were. And there's a group of people who think we deserve to have some kind of, you know, compensation, or what do they call it? I said it earlier in the video. Comment down below if you know what I'm talking about. You know, compensation's a fine word to say. And these two groups are kind of clashing, because one thinks it's unfair and another thinks it's, even though they might get some compensation, it's still not fair. It's difficult, right? But the fact that Maori people even have a chance to have their grievances against actions of past governments investigated, I think that's a very nice thing for them to be able to even do, and not at all something that we have been able to enact anywhere else in the world, right? I don't think... Oh, actually, I guess in America there is some council for Native Americans, I think. I'm not super sure about that, but I think there might be some councils for them. But in Australia, we don't have that at all. Imagine addressing grievances of Aboriginal people. Not possible. Actually, what happens to Aboriginal people in Australia is they get jailed. They get put in like temporary jail sometimes if they're acting too erratic, and then they just die in jail. Yeah, it happens a lot in Australia. If you want to learn about some dark Australian stuff, look up what happens to Aboriginals in jail. It's really fucked up. So yeah, there's a ton of different resources to learn more about the treaty claims and settlements. How many claims are there and how many have been settled? So more than 2,000 claims have been lodged with the tribunal. By 2010, legislations have been passed for settlements with a total value of about 950 million. It's a lot of money. Yeah, 3 early settlement commercial fisheries, 170 million. Waikato Tainui Raupatu, 170 million. And Nagai Tahu, 170 million. I don't understand, but I guess a lot of people have had recompense or something. That's my understanding of what I just read. And in the 2008 Central North Island Forest Agreement, 161 million make up the bulk of this amount. Claims may be historical or contemporary, and they may relate to either specific pieces of land or a generic government policy. Any Maori can make a claim at the tribunal. So many claims relate to the same group of people or events. The tribunal groups overlapping claims into distinct inquiries, which are then researched until a casebook of evidence is completed. Hearings are held, at which claimants and the Crown give evidence. The tribunal then writes a report on whether the claims are well-founded. The Crown negotiates treaty settlements at the large natural group level. Historical Hapu subtribe and Whānau extended family claims within a larger group are commonly addressed in one set of negotiations. Usually when a settlement is negotiated, all the existing and potential historical claims made by that claimant group are settled. And once legislation is passed, the tribunal has no further power to hear historical claims from that group. So there is a limit to what can be claimed, I guess. And even then, from my understanding, the tribunal merely just gives evidence, researches, and then provides information to which then the Crown will negotiate. So it seems like the Crown still has like a lot of power there and the final say, if any. So it's really not that big of a deal as maybe it might sound. You might think like any Maori person can make a claim. What if they claim like my house, for instance? Can they do that? I don't think that's how it works. And if it were to be something like that, they would merely just get like financial recompense, I guess. But even that, I'm just going off what I'm reading here, okay? So there could be things to it, there could be not things to it. But apparently people hear this and they think that Maori people have like extended privilege. So there was a Declaration of Independence. He waka putanga o te rangatiratanga o Nu Tirini Te Rene? I don't know. The Declaration of Independence of New Zealand was signed in 1835. It has signatures from Maori chiefs and Northern chiefs. Okay. It has 4 articles. New Zealand is declared to be an independent state. All sovereign power and authority in the land resides with the chiefs in their collective capacity, expressed as the United Tribes of New Zealand. Chiefs will meet annually at Waitangi to make laws in return for the friendship and protection that Maori will give British subjects in New Zealand. So they really did just say, like, hey, look, we'll accept you British people being in our country, we'll be nice to you, but we still get to have some independence there. The chiefs invite King William IV to protect the infant state from attempts on its independence. Maori have seen the declaration as British recognition of an independent Maori nation. They have also used as a foundation for their assertion of autonomous rights, or mana motuhake. The declaration is on display in the He Tohu exhibition at the Te Puna Mataranga o Aotearoa National Library of New Zealand in Wellington. Yo, I've been to Wellington. Okay, so that is the rundown of the treaty. You may have your own ideas about it. Let's move on to why the hell do people think that Maori people have some sort of like insane privilege that, you know, regular people do not. And so this is Peter Mehana, the pervasive myth of Maori privilege, and just want to go through some of the stuff about Maori privilege, or how it's perceived. And he goes on to when the 1700s, when James Cook turned up in the Pacific. He viewed the Maori people, and he thought from observation that they were closely resembling the British. For instance, there was an agricultural people. If you tilled the soil, Cook saw you as being higher on the scale of progress than people who were deemed to be hunter-gatherers. So, like with the Aboriginals were hunter-gatherers. They were people who lived off the land in a very, like, what we view as like a tribal way of being. And so they thought of the Aboriginals as savages, meant for being slaves, and they saw the Maori people as people who were higher up on the scale, because there were people who were Maori who cultivated the soil and grew kumara, which is like a sweet potato, I believe. As time went on and missionaries arrived, the argument developed that because the people in New Zealand were a special kind of indigenous people, they needed to be protected from people like land speculators, aka the French, I think. Or like anyone else. The British were like, we need these people to be ours. So yeah, and then blah blah blah, we know what happened about like the stuff, the settling and all that stuff. We already went through that, so I won't make you go through that again. Yeah. Okay, so in effect, having the same rights as privileges as British subjects. Right, so when the Liberals came to power in 1890s, damn Liberals. I don't know, I feel like I'm gonna sneeze. Sorry, I'm still having my hay fever moment. Sorry, I remember there was a comment in the last video being like, I think they said it was rude to like smack my lips in their ears or something. I don't understand where that came from. Actually, side note, I want to say one of the comments from my last video actually had me thinking about it for a whole week. There was a comment about me being a furry, and I genuinely was thinking about it for a whole week, thinking like, furry? Like, why does someone think I'm a furry? Like, I don't fucking care, but it's also like, where does that come from? And I was really racking my brain thinking about it, because right after filming the last podcast, I took the cat ears off. They're off at the moment because I was going to go out and I was going to wear my headphones, and I didn't want to wear the ears because I didn't want them getting caught on shit. Because they even get caught on stuff even when I'm wearing them in the house. Also, I mean, I don't think I care that much wearing them outside, to be honest. It's not something that I don't really get embarrassed about things that much. So then I was like, a few days later, after the podcast, I was like, oh, my cat ears, and I put them back on for the stream, and then I was like, Oh, that's why people think I'm a furry. I was genuinely thinking about that for so long, like scratching my head being like, where does this come from? Anyway, yeah, that was a massive side note. Okay, so when the Liberals came into power, they reimposed Crown preemption, but at the time, New Zealand was coming out of a depression, so that meant that wool, meat, and dairy products became increasingly important. And as you may know, New Zealand has a lot of, like, sheep. Yeah, you might have heard some things about the New Zealanders and sheep and stuff, but yeah, wool, meat, dairy, it's a very important part of New Zealand, I guess, like their agriculture and shit. So getting more settlers on the land was a priority for the Liberal government, so there was a push by the Crown to acquire more land, which by default meant Maori land. And so from there into the 1900s, we saw hundreds of thousands of more acres lost to the Maori people. So the Maori people were losing their land, even though they had been given some kind of rights to their land and to sell their land to whoever they wanted. Some shit happened. So even like policies like preemption, they've been framed as protecting Maori and were therefore seen by some as a privilege, still paved the way for Maori land to be transferred to settlers. In 1900, after Maori petitioned Queen Victoria and Parliament, the Native Lands Administration Act was passed, and this made the Maori more hopeful that their land would be given some more protections, or they'd have more say over their own land. And then there were provisions within the act that allowed Maori to lease their land rather than selling it outright. And then there was a very weird concept brought to this that said, like, oh, well, if the Maori are going to lease their land, they're gonna end up becoming like, they're gonna end up collecting just rent and spending it on tobacco. They actually thought that. They actually said, if you allow them to lease their land, they're gonna become indolent. Which means they're just going to become like lazy fuckers. That's what they thought. They argued that Pākehā farmers would make the land profitable while Maori would collect rent and spend it on tobacco, so that they would be just using farmers and then they'd be lazy. Okay. And you know what when I read that was so interesting to me is that we have the same exact opinion about Aboriginal people today. We have the opinion, a lot of the white people in Australia have the opinion that if Aboriginals are collecting government benefits, then they're just going to spend it on alcohol and cigarettes and they're not going to do anything with themselves. And I even see this on TikTok all the time. I used to get live video, like, you know, you can go live on TikTok. I'd see Aboriginals doing live videos and they'd just be having a party or they'd just be like hanging out. And every single thing that people have to say about them is that like, oh, Aboriginals drinking alcohol. What? Wow, what's new there? Because there's this historical stuff about how when the British came, they gave alcohol to the Aboriginals and the Aboriginals liked it so much that now there's like there was a problem with Aboriginals and alcoholism in the past and stuff. And I mean, when you go through that much generational fucking trauma, I'm sure it has a significant impact on your mental health. And also to add on to that, Scottish people, Irish people, they all are very alcoholic as well, right? In fact, many cultures have very deep ties to alcoholism and addiction. It's not just something that like it's so racist. It's like no one looks at an Irish person drinking that people think that's normal. People go to St. Patrick's Day and be like, yep, it's all about drinking alcohol. And then you tell someone that you're Irish and you're like having a party or something and you're like, yeah, I'm Irish, glug, glug, glug. No one says anything like, yep, you're Irish and you're drinking. I expected that, you filthy fucking Irish person. Ah! It's like, am I taking crazy pills? People don't understand the restrictions that were placed on Maori at the time and the very limited options they had to try and operate and survive in colonial systems. So, yeah. So then, because of this idea that Maori people had some sort of benefits about leasing from 1900, when the act was introduced, arguments about Maori privilege were deployed in earnest by the farmers' union, saying that, oh, the Maori will just lease the land and benefit off of it. And the Conservative Opposition Party. By 1909, the leasing provisions in the act had been amended away. So that's a good example of how privilege or notions of some sort of purported privilege can be used to swing policy in favour of settlers. So then it became a thing again where Maori just had to sell their land, I guess. So that's Pog. Yeah, we saw it in the pandemic as well. We saw a lot in the pandemic. Maori communities were trying to take control and provide leadership for their people, and we saw claims and assertions of Maori privilege again. Part of that goes back to how New Zealanders see themselves. They have a view about their country and about how it was built. It's the exact same in Australia. We have a lot of our Australian people have ideas about how Australia was created, how the settlers came, and it's interesting. I guess everyone had a kind of a different education about it. When I was in primary school and stuff, we were taught everything to a T, and we were spared no details about what happened. And you know, the reason why we even know what happened is because there is documented evidence, right? But I suppose depending on what government is in power, some people, even what schools you go to, you learn very different things, right? So I went to pretty liberal schools, I guess you could say, or very left-leaning schools, and we learned about all the things, and we learned it in the context of like, you know what? We deeply regret how things happened, and it would be nice if the Aboriginal people were able to live their lives in a way that wasn't embedded in racism. Okay. So, yeah, New Zealanders have retained the idea that what happened in New Zealand was different from other places and that Maori received a special deal. I think that the specialty that Maori got was that they just didn't get slaughtered, and that they were somewhat treated as human beings. Somewhat. I think that's the only specialty that they earned, or got from that, whereas Aboriginals didn't get anything like that. So I guess I can see how people would see that as special, but I feel like to consider human beings being treated as human beings remotely as special, I feel like that says a lot about it, don't you think? Yeah. Some people, I think, almost see what Maori is doing now as being ungrateful for what they were given. They see Maori fighting to retain a place in this nation as tearing apart the very fabric of what it means to be a New Zealander. And the origins of these claims of privilege in history were to try to undermine Maori collectivism, to undermine the tribe, and to more easily divest us of our land. If that history tells us anything, it tells us that when some Pākehā people feel under threat, these notions of Maori privilege become more pronounced. Oh, okay, hold on. I want to look up what Pākehā means, actually. Wait. Maori, what does Pākehā mean? Pākehā is a short form of Pākehakeha, meaning imaginary beings with fair skin. Okay, so when they say Pākehā, I guess they mean like just, yeah, the white people, I guess. Imaginary beings with fair skin. That is so interesting. Yeah, so when I guess you could say when the British people feel under threat, these notions of Maori privilege become pronounced. It's an interesting way to interpret that. We're seeing it now in the conversation around co-governance, and when there's a peak in these claims and assertions of Maori privilege, then historically at least we've seen Maori have lost things. That is very true, and this is what is happening today, right now. When they are revising the treaty, the Maori people only see to lose things that they actually really fucking need. For example, there is a health ministry specifically for Maori people, right? Because Maori people, there is quite a disparity between morbidity factors between ethnic groups in New Zealand. Specifically, Maori people, Pacific Islanders, I think, they have very increased risks of death from very like easily fixable things. So there's a study here that's the inequity of morbidity, disparities in the prevalence of morbidity between ethnic groups in New Zealand. And so they investigated New Zealanders aged 18 plus, stratified by ethnic group: Maori, Pacific, Asian, Middle Eastern, Latin American, African, European, other. And they used national level hospitalization pharmaceutical data and 2 measures of morbidity. And the results, they observed substantial disparities for Maori and Pacific peoples compared to other ethnic groups for vast majority of commonly diagnosed morbidities. And this has something to do with something we call institutionalized racism. And it's something we've even been learning about women as well. For instance, did you know that over-the-counter like painkillers only ever really been researched on men? Not only is there deeply embedded racism in medicine, but there's also a lot of misogyny, sexism that's deeply rooted in it. As I'm saying here, there's a lot of problems with a lot of our systems, and a way of combating this is by creating departments, creating governing bodies that can kind of patch up the holes in these areas that we have. Or they can kind of try and find a way to make things better for people who are disadvantaged. And if we're looking as a culture to make things more even for everyone, or making equality, part of that equality is uplifting people who are disadvantaged. And because you might be in a position of being quite advantaged or privileged, say being like a white person, when you see other people being uplifted, that equaling can feel like you're losing something, but it's really just someone coming up to your level. Like, I know I've been waffling about this for so long because I'm just so upset about all this, you know? Like, it's hard not to be. It's hard not to be because a lot of people will look at this and be like, dude, that's so fucking cool. The football haka, it's so fucking cool. But then the moment people start doing the haka in Parliament, it's like, this is not the place for that. This is a place of Parliament. You should be bringing your words, not singing and dancing like a toddler. It's like, it's incredibly disrespectful, and it really shows like just how people are just insane. Insane. So I guess I was hoping to do here is just shed a little bit of light on, I guess, Maori culture. I mean, I'm obviously I don't have deep ties to Maori culture, but I feel very passionate about recognizing the things that they're going through, and the fact that there is this weird thing where people will talk about something that they don't know anything about, but they talk about it as if they do, with such confidence. And I feel like if you don't know, if you haven't done research on these things, you don't have a right to really talk about it at all. You just don't. I think so many people will just say like, oh, Maori people are so privileged. Well, it's like, they're not really that privileged, are they? And even then, the medical board that was made for Maori people specifically to ensure that they would be actually seen for things that any other person might be seen for, that came into being in 2022 and then was abolished so quickly. Like, you just can't make this shit up, man. And it's so interesting to see that people will see it as like, oh well, they're actually, we're getting more equal to them, and it's like, no, they're just losing out on this way more than they should be. And I have a problem with that. I have a problem with people seeing it that way. I really do. So I had another thing I want to read off, but I was reading on my phone, so I'm gonna need to find it again. I already read about the treaty. I don't think this one I need. Yeah, it's not this one. Sorry about this. I tried to be very like organized with my tabs this time around. I think it was good, but I have to look more. Okay, let's have a look. Why is a bill looking at a New Zealand's founding document causing major upset? Is that it? Wow, I like literally looked it up and I can't find it. This might be good. Alright, Maori Haka in New Zealand Parliament to protest a bill to reinterpret founding treaty. This might be good. Opposition party MP Hana Rawiti Maipi Clark began a traditional ceremonial group dance after being asked whether her party supported the bill, which faced its first vote on Thursday. And again, remember, there was a planned haka that was going to be done, I think, like during the original date of the bill, but the bill was pushed forward. So I think what they did here was in response to that as well. Meanwhile, in Hikoi, or Peaceful Protest March, organised by a Maori rights group, is continuing to make its way towards the capital, Wellington. Thousands have already joined the 9-day march against the bill, which reached Auckland on Wednesday. Oh wow. And have begun in the far north of New Zealand on Monday. The country is often considered a leader in Indigenous rights, yes, but opponents of this bill fear those same rights are being put at risk by this bill. So ACT, the political party that introduced the bill, argues that there is a need to legally define the principles of the 1840 Treaty of Waitangi, which has been fundamental to race relations in New Zealand. Core values of the treaty have over time been woven into New Zealand's laws in an effort to redress the wrong done to Maori during colonisation. I also think that as a white person, I don't have a single problem with trying to right wrongs that happened in the past. I think that a lot of people believe, as I said before, that it's like, well, it happened in the past, it's like, get over it, and shit like that, but I genuinely don't see a problem with it, and I don't know why. It's the same as, like, I believe if I could spend a little bit more tax money to ensure children would eat, you know, lunch, I would 100% be okay with that. It's like, what happened to our society and, like, how we used to want to make things better for our fellow man? It's also the idea of like the future generations. Don't you want the future generations to have a better time? I want, if I have kids, I want my kids to have a better future, you know? If you genuinely see things as like, oh well, I had a hard time, so you deserve to have a hard time too. Why do you think that? Genuinely, why do you think that? Do I have to pay off my student loan so my kids don't have to do it? Thank God. Thank God. But no, then there's people who were able to get a free education, and they too want other people to have a free education. I think that to be a good person is to wish better for your fellow human. And you know what we've seen with like Black Lives Matter and stuff is like Black Lives Matter opened my eyes to like so many things, honestly, because I genuinely feel like there wasn't that much talk about the disadvantages that, you know, people of color have been through. And when you're like me and you've grown up in predominantly like white areas, there's a lot of things you just don't think about, right? And I think even reparations, that's the word, reparations. I think even reparations for people of color in America, like that, like honestly, and I think it'd be good to do something, but we also have to recognize that there's no amount of money that can change what happened and change the outcome. Like, you know, black people are still gonna wonder about like their history. Black people are still gonna wonder about their ancestors because all that shit is just lost because of colonization, slavery. Like, there's so much to this, and it just makes me so sad when people are just ignorant, just willingly ignorant about this stuff. It literally does not hurt me talking about this issue. I guess it's easy for me to say because I'm not in New Zealand. I'm sure people who live in New Zealand, maybe they have a different idea for different reasons, but I didn't have a problem with uplifting Aboriginal voices because I didn't listen to misinformation and I understood the facts of it. But unfortunately, a lot of people, they hear one source and they go, yep, that must be it. Oh, everyone's saying that, that must be it. And has anyone noticed how much misinformation is being put out on TikTok now? I feel like there's been a massive increase in misinformation, like a ginormous increase. Like, I'm sure TikTok and any social media platform is always gonna have some misinformation, some like dubious claims, but dude, it's like the stuff now is like shit that's even getting me. It's even shit that's getting like me, and I'm usually like pretty good at not being influenced by that stuff. Yeah. Alright, so under the proposed legislation, the treaty principles that would be defined in law are that the government has a right to govern and that Parliament has the full right to make laws. That the rights of Maori are respected by the Crown and that everyone is equal before the law and is entitled to equal protection under it. I guess they kind of write that and make it sound like it's very like, okay. Like, okay, none of that really necessarily sounds bad, but I think it's this top one that's the most important, which is that the government has a right to govern and that Parliament has full right to make laws. And I think at the moment, the Maori Tribunal probably have some kind of power in there, judging by like the way that that's written. Act Leader Seymour, who is also New Zealand's Associate Justice Minister, argues that because the principles have never been properly defined legally, the courts have been able to develop principles that have been used to justify actions that are contrary to the principle of equal rights. Yeah, it's this idea of equal rights, isn't it? It's very interesting. Equal rights. Equal rights. Like, people could say that, oh, the Maori have like a health ministry specifically for them. That's not fair. Where's the white people's Ministry of Health? That's just health in general. Man. Meanwhile, the Waitangi Tribunal, which was set up in 1975, as we know, to investigate alleged breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi, notes the bill purposefully excluded any consultation with Maori. See, I picked up on that. Breaching the principle of partnership, the Crown's good faith obligations, and the Crown's duty to actively protect Maori rights and interests. Wow. It is also said the principles of the bill misinterpreted the Treaty of Waitangi and that this caused significant prejudice to Maori. We've been over that. Wow. The tabling of the treaty principles bill comes following a series of measures introduced by government that have affected Maori. Yeah, the Maori Health Authority. They include the closure of the Maori Health Authority, which was set up under Jacinda Ardern's Labour government. Yeah, Jacinda Ardern, a lot of people had a lot to say about her, especially when she ended her ministry or whatever the fuck it was. I think she, didn't she retire prematurely a little bit or something? She was the government during COVID, so I think she probably had a fuck of a job, you know? Anyone who was governing during COVID probably had a fuck of a time. Yeah, so she created that to help create health equity and reprioritizing English over Maori when it comes to the official naming of government organizations, for example. Okay. Well, roughly 18% of New Zealand's population consider themselves to be Maori, according to the most recent census. Many remain disadvantaged compared with the general population. When assessed through markers such as health outcomes, household income, and education levels, and incarceration mortality rates, there remains a 7-year gap in life expectancy. That is significant. Life expectancy, 7-year gap? If you're expected to die at 80, then they're expected to die at like 73. It's kind of a major gap, isn't it? It is contentious as the treaty is contentious as it was written in both English and Maori, which has only been a spoken language until colonization. The two versions contain fundamental differences. So I guess in a way, I don't see a problem in trying to be like, okay, let's figure this out. Let's figure out what this is and what we need to do. But the fact that the ACT government or the current government is completely discluding discussion with Maori people, that's concerning. It really does seem like they have no intent to include Maori people in decision making when it comes to Maori people. Anyway, I feel like I'm kind of gapping now, but that's kind of what I had to say. I think it's very important that we remember what Maori culture is, and it's important to remember that New Zealand is definitely a leader when it comes to representing an Indigenous people, and as an Australian, I champion that. I think I always will. I think that it is so important to preserve the culture, and yeah, I frankly think that the idea that Maori people have some kind of like overprivilege over like everybody else, that they're somehow above the law, I think that's ridiculous, especially when you consider that incarceration is probably higher among their population than like any other population in New Zealand. That's something that I'm asserting, but I'm not totally sure on. So I'm just gonna end the pod today by saying, what are we doing here? What are we doing here, guys? Do we respect our fellow human being? Do we want better for our fellow people who are disadvantaged? Or do we want to be a selfish person? And yeah, I think frankly I do judge people who are selfish. I judge people greatly when they are, I guess, conservative in some sort of nature. You know, it used to be a thing where I believed that no matter what party or what thought you were from, everyone kind of wants the same thing. Everyone wants to just live a nice life. Everyone wants to be happy, right? We just maybe had different ways of getting there. But it just seems to me that this division is only being caused by government and misinformation. So I would just urge you all to actually do like people always say, do your own research, do your own research. Well, actually do your own research. Actually do it. Don't stop saying that you know you should do that. Or if anything, listen to people who have done the research. And I guess that's all I have to say about that. And if you think that doing the haka in Parliament, when the Parliament was built on Maori land, remember you are on their land, and they in the past peacefully allowed you to come live there, or at least ancestors or whatever. They allowed that to happen. They were nice, they signed a treaty, and now they're, I guess, the protections of their culture is being stripped away. Wouldn't you also feel deeply unsettled by that if your cultural protections were taken away? The cultural protection to I don't know, go to the pancake parlor. That's my culture. That's my culture. My cultural protection is drinking on a certain day and wearing green. That's my culture. And I guess maybe you it's just like, to a degree, you just can't imagine it if you don't have that culture. But I feel like for me as an Australian, I have a unique perspective where we just don't have that with Aboriginal people, and it is something that is so, I think that's something that Australians deeply regret in a way. Of course there's like stuff there, like the Australian stuff is so complicated and I don't have enough time to go through all of that right now, but at the end of the day, there's a deep regret there for not putting in more effort to just like preserve the culture. There's a lot that's been lost to history, to colonization, and honestly the Indigenous Australian population is so tiny now. Are Indigenous Australians... No. Indigenous Australian population. Because you really don't see Indigenous Australians, like, ever. Yeah, Indigenous incarceration is at a record high. Yep. Not surprised there. And I think like another thing, sorry to yap some more about this, but another thing is that people will go like, oh, well, you know, they're just getting incarcerated more because that's just who they are. That is like major red flag right there. It's a result of history because they come from a disadvantaged background, and people with disadvantaged backgrounds, you can look it up, they tend to be less educated, unfortunately, because they can't afford it, or they live in places where it just like is not accessible. I think accessibility is a big thing, and so when these things happen, these people turn to, I guess, things that we deem like illegal and shit, right? But then there's also the institutional racism we talked about. So for example, police officers being unfair or unjust to people of color because of racism. And I feel like it's not a very hard concept to understand, but I will repeat it over and over again because it's just the way that that is. And you can look it up, you can do your own research, but I'm telling you, that is the way that it is. And the way to combat that is to uplift these disadvantaged people, namely getting the youth involved, making things accessible to youth people. So that's why when we do things, we have things where it's like, are you a Torres Strait Islander or Aboriginal person? Because they get some sort of special concessions, but that doesn't mean that they get like... That doesn't mean that they're like overthrowing us in some sort of weird way, or like how people think. Like, it's to give a disadvantaged low population of people a chance to break away from that generational trauma, a chance for them to do something that we get a chance for every day. So that's just what I want to say. I'm gonna end it there. Actually ending it there. Lol. Sorry for the yap, but I think this is very important, and if you think it's important, please share with your friends, tell them about what's happening, educate them if you can, or do your own research if you really think so. If you think you need to do some more research on it, do research. You know, there's nothing wrong with trying to look things up, reading things. There's nothing wrong. I literally didn't know that much about this until today because I just felt passionate enough about it to read about it. And I'll probably be doing some more reading about it. And, you know, unexpected, but it was actually kind of nice to do a podcast episode about something that's like I'm passionate about. So there's that. And I also always wanted to talk a bit more about Australia because I get a lot of questions about Australia, so it gave me a chance to talk about us a little bit. And I hope that helps you learn a bit. If you are a bit sus about some of the claims I made, go do research, go look it up, and hey, if you really want to, you could comment about like what things I think maybe got wrong, because I'm sure I got something wrong here. And I'm all for people having like a discussion. No, I'm all for a polite discussion, okay guys? Alright, so number one, comment down below what you think. I think number two, welcome to the fairy club. Alright, I'm gonna go now. Alright guys, take care, look after yourselves, drink water. That's very important. I'm gonna rest my voice for a little bit because I've been yapping for a while. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your week, and I hope you have a good Monday. Alright, peace everybody. Peace. Piss? Peace. Okay, bye.